Welcome to If People Only Knew, the show that brings untold stories to light. I'm your host, Anna Matson. Let's get started. Welcome to the show. Today we have Wayne Rohde, and he wrote The Vaccine Court 2.0. He has his own podcast, Right on Point, and he's interviewed a lot of leaders in the medical freedom movement, including RFK Jr. I listened to that one actually this morning, and it was really good. But welcome, Wayne. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much, Anna. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Awesome. And yeah, is there anything else you're kind of like working on right now? Like those are the big things that you've done in the past. Is any other projects you're working on?
Well, yeah, there is. There's actually a few things. One is, being the author of the Vaccine Court and then also Vaccine Court 2.0. My editor came to me about a year ago and asked me to do a third book. And I said, well, I don't want to do another book on the Vaccine Court, which is the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program right now, because it's virtually the same. But I'd like to find out what's happening in the rest of the world. So
Mm.
one of the projects I've got going on is writing about vaccine injury compensation schemes or programs in other countries. And that's taken some time because one, you have to interview people from other parts of the world, but also, and then you try to do a comparative analysis of what their schemes are like versus the United States. And it's you can't compare. It's like apples to oranges. It's very difficult to compare. Um, so I've got that going, and I'm about halfway through. It's just a labor of love, if you will, for writing that.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because I think it was just yesterday I was looking up the numbers because a lot of people have asked, like, what does the autism rate look like compared to other countries? And so I really started to dive into like Europe, and they even have like a website that's funded by the EU all about autism. But the last thing they posted on there was from 2023. Like, they don't really look at anything. And like they do say that the causes are probably genetic, but they actually go a step further than we do in the United States. And they say, while it's genetic, there's environmental factors that could affect it. So they're a little bit ahead of us in that regard. But yeah, it's really hard to find data on this stuff because they just don't really talk about it. They don't study it. So I hear you there.
Yeah, it's interesting is when you start comparing other countries, like United Kingdom, you are allowed to sue the country itself
Okay.
through and take up if you're permanently disabled, and in the United Kingdom it has to be 60%. You have to be permanently disabled 60% of your body physically. They have a difficult time trying to figure out what intellectual disability is yet.
Mm.
So then you're eligible up to, for payment up to 120,000 sterling. So if you die, yes, you get there. But for the people that are maybe only getting a doctor, well, maybe you're 50, 55%. Wait, well, what's it take to get me to 60 is what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you can have that, you can go that route there, or you can try to sue the manufacturer itself, which you're able to, but it's very difficult over there. Germany and Hungary and France and Spain, all the different systems too, and they've been in place. Some of them are just been in place because of regular vaccines. Germany was the first nation in the world to actually have some type of a vaccine injury compensation program back in the 60s.
Wow.
So you have those things. Canada kind of took our what we call our countermeasures injury compensation program for COVID related injuries and adopted it for theirs. But it's difficult to migrate through because you have to get a doctor to approve it. And most doctors are going to say, nope, I don't want even want to touch it. That
Mm.
type of deal. You have other countries like Taiwan and Singapore who have been compensating fairly generously for most injuries. Korea just developed one now. I mean, we're 5 years into this thing and they just
Wow.
figured it out. Australia's just kind of figuring it out now too. I find it fascinating that these countries put time limits on. This compensation program is only good from X date to X date, and we're only going to allocate so many dollars. Once that's used up, then we're done. I mean, this it's kind of strange. So
Wow.
trying to create uh, sense out of this by interviewing people, and it's difficult to find people. I've had to wake up in the middle of the night to talk to someone, some advocate over on the other side of the world, and you get a sense of a lot of frustration because most people don't understand it. And then comparing their health systems versus what we offer, it's
Mhm.
different. It's a different concept. So that's one project that I'm trying to do. It's slowly wrapping it up. The other one that I'm actually doing a couple projects right now is that I teach an online course on the MVICP and the CICP. This is my 4th year doing it. And it's through ipac-edu.org. Dr. James Lyons Weiler is the organization, and I teach an online course. It's a weekly course for about 10 weeks. We're right in the middle of it right now. So I have advocates from the United States, but people from around the world actually tune in, and we have a discussion. It's not me just lecturing to people. We'll throw out a topic and we kind of bounce back and forth people's ideas. And it's kind of fun. It's
That's
it's it's
awesome.
energetic. So that the third project is something that it's ongoing. You mentioned I interviewed Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Mhm.
I did that. I've known Robert Kennedy Jr. since probably was the 2011,
Mm.
and it was interesting is that in my book, The Vaccine Court 2.0, there was a paper released back in May of 2011 called The Unanswered Questions. And what it was is 4 authors and their investigative team of researchers found it was actually 83 documented cases of where our government compensated people for vaccine induced autism. They found 83 cases of where they just went through the court decisions,
Mhm.
and they published this paper and they asked if they can find that, there's got to be more. Well, there's a backstory to that, and I wrote that backstory in 2.0 where I found the 4 authors, Mary Holland, who is the CEO of Children's Health Defense now,
Yeah.
Robert Krakow, who's an attorney that practices in the MVICP, Lou Conti, who's a good friend of mine, and at the time was working uh, in New York, and Lisa Colin is another attorney. And I wrote about how they got together. And it was interesting is that how they met Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for the first time in 2009 when he was at Pace University there in New York City. And they needed to try to put the paper together and get a peer review process going and get it published in some type of a journal. And that's how their paths crossed for the first time. It was quite interesting. And I met Bobby a couple years later after that, and we started chatting a little bit. And he's playing 5-dimensional chess against everybody else's checkers. It's unbelievable what it's like. But then I was asked, along with about 45 other people, when we wrote the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, we all were asked to write certain chapters and then source them or whatever with Bobby's help. And we did that. And I did a couple of the chapters, and it was real interesting for that. Well, when the book finally got published, he was out on a book tour, and then we were in COVID, and he was
Yeah.
coming back from Italy. He got kind of stalled in Italy. He couldn't get out of the country because of the
Oh,
COVID
really? I didn't
restrictions.
know that.
Yeah, it was crazy traveling at the time.
I actually
So
went to Italy during COVID. It was funny because, well, I got married in 2020. We wanted to go to Italy for our honeymoon, but that didn't work out because the whole country was closed down, especially my state. And so we went a year later. So it was April 2021, and we already had the trip booked and everything, and it was like super cheap. And we were thinking that like, okay, COVID's pretty much done at this point. And if you had COVID in the last 6 months, we were told that then you can just travel freely. You don't have to have the vaccine or anything. And we had it like 4 months prior. And my mom's from Italy. So she actually like called the country and like asked like, okay, my daughter's coming. She has the doctor's paperwork saying that she had COVID at this time. Like, is she good? And they told her, yep, all good. And so we arrive and they're like, no, your papers are no good. You need a doctor here that had said that. And we're like, okay. So we had to get tested for COVID every 2 days to be able to do
Mhm.
anything. And everything's closed on Sunday. And it was Saturday. And the doctors there are like in each pharmacy, there's a doctor. And so we went in to the local pharmacy in the town that we were staying in, and they're like, no, there's no doctor here today. And so we had to go to the next town over. And it was very close to like 5 o'clock, and they all started to close. So we had to go like to 10 different ones. And finally, we found one right before they were going to close. And they didn't want to do it at first since we weren't citizens. So I called my mom and she talked to them because she's fluent Italian and everything. So she talked them into just testing us so we could do anything the next day. um, so yeah, it was fun. And then right when we got back home, Italy like shut down all their COVID stuff. Like you could travel freely. You didn't need to be tested anymore. So fun times. So yeah, I almost got stuck there too. So
It's depending on your vaccination status and a few other things. But Bobby got stuck on there, and I think a lot of it was possibly political because of his
Mm,
stance on where he was. And but he got back, and we had this interview scheduled for about 2.5 months, almost 3 months. And so when he stepped into behind the mic at his little studio in his home, he just got off the plane about an hour and a half
wow.
before and been traveling all night. So, but we had a great interview.
Hmm.
We ended up talking for about 3 hours, but only used about 35 minutes maybe of the
Oh,
interview
really?
because we were just chatting about other things, and it was kind of it was fun, but I could see that he was a little bit, you know, for jet lag and everything else, and but we were just talking about things. But so
Hmm.
I I did the interview and I thought, okay, this is going to be good, but I had to go in and edit it, and we were talking about the book, and it was, lo and behold, I didn't know how big the book was going to be, but it really turned out to be a huge bestseller on the New York Times list and Amazon's lists. It's incredible what people
Hmm.
took from that book, but yet Anthony Fauci is still walking around civilization right now. I truly believe this guy should be in jail for what he did.
Yeah,
Um,
for crimes against humanity. Like
you know,
it really is unbelievable. And I mean, there was no reason for Biden to pardon him unless he did something wrong. Like he knows he did something wrong. And yeah, I'm at least glad his Secret Service got taken away. There's no reason that we should be funding him in any way. But yeah, it's crazy. Trump talked about how maybe the pardons are not actually legal, that Joe Biden didn't really sign them. There's an argument that Joe Biden was not even fit to sign any kind of contract. And yeah, so we'll kind of see. I haven't, Trump said it and then he hasn't talked about it since. And I don't know if everyone has heard, but there's now a COVID.gov, and it even shows that, Fauci has been pardoned by Joe Biden. So I think they're just kind of settling with that. I don't really think they're going to push it. But there was, like, I heard a whisper that states could still sue Fauci for what he did. So We will see. We will see.
We'll see. It's interesting is that there was some recent conversations with Ron Klain, I believe it Klan, the former chief of staff of President Biden. He was critical of people using the defense that Biden was using an auto pen or whatever it was. I think he knows that Biden wasn't running the government, and this is his way of saying, "Hey, there was problems in there." But it was
Mhm.
interesting is that you know you have each administration. The first Trump administration was was poorly ran as far as vaccine or science issues, and then
Mhm.
of course you have Biden's administration here. So both are to blame as far as what's happened with COVID. So you have to deal with it. But getting back to some of the things that I was working with is that um, the MVICP and is basically kind of the nickname, the vaccine court, is actually not a court. It's
Okay.
an it's it's a modified legal administrative process. Believe it or not, when you file a petition, we all know that President Reagan signed the act in 1986.
Well,
Once a lot of it,
let's actually go back a little bit just in case people don't know a lot of this stuff because I have talked about it here and there. I like to say I've said it numerous times on my show that it is I believe against the Constitution for us to not be able to sue vaccine manufacturers if someone's been injured. That the Seventh Amendment clearly states that you can sue people over controversy over $20. So it is mind-boggling to me that act is even around still. And I found out it's actually never been challenged on its constitutionality. So that's interesting. And yeah, but I haven't really expanded too much other than that. So first, let's just go back a little bit. Out of everything you've done, like how did you even get here? Like where did you start out? Where were you 30 years ago? And like how did you even get involved in all of this?
well, I was actually selling computer software. I was a big software. I was a national sales manager for a firm out of Dallas. We're selling computer software to hospitality industry, to actually country clubs, things like this. And that's where I was. I was traveling. I had some regions with some salespeople, and I met my wife um, in Oklahoma City. She was working for the city of Oklahoma City at the time, and we were looking at doing Oklahoma City's golf courses, plus also some private country clubs. And that's where I met my wife at the time. Um, we were married in 1994. That's how old I am here. Um, 3 years later, we had our twins were born. And the reason why I keep that is that it was on our third wedding anniversary. The evening of our third wedding anniversary, my wife, we had to take her to the hospital. Her water broke
Wow.
and it was going like this. So we rushed to the hospital. We were living in North Dallas, actually Plano at the time. And we had twins, and Austin being the firstborn and Nicholas being the secondborn. But they were born 10 days apart.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
Austin was impatient and wanted to be born. So he came on October 19th, 4 days later, and Nicholas didn't want to be born. He was just like the sonograms looked like a surfer dude. He was just laying back, having fun, just relaxing, and then he wanted to be born 10 days later. They were a little bit premature. By the time we took him home in first part of December, so they stayed in a NICU. And then we brought them home in December. They were starting to meet their developmental milestones. As far as size, their weight, and then at 12 months, speech and everything else came with it. They were a little bit sick. We were going to take them in for their first baby visit, baby visit. We didn't do anything prior to that. And they were sick, so we decided we're going to reschedule and went in on 13th month, the next month. And then that's where they got the first vaccine was their MMR. And Austin screamed and yelled for about 2 minutes, and then he was done and he was fine with it. But Nicholas had a severe reaction to it.
Hmm.
And it was what we call the true anaphylactic or allergic reaction. And we could see that today, I could tell you that he was suffering from an encephalopathy because of a brain injury. But the reaction that he had is that he had this screech and scream and the arching of his back, and he just turned
Wow.
extremely red. And then over the next 2 weeks, we had to deal with spiking of temperatures, the diarrhea, the vomiting, the constant crying. And then he kind of calmed down after about 2 weeks. But my wife was constantly calling the pediatrician's office, once or twice a day
Wow.
and saying, what's going on? What's going on here? And, they were saying, well, everything will be fine. Just at the time, give him Tylenol, then give him basically Motrin, which you never give. Today, we know we don't give Tylenol to a child. That's the worst thing you can do. And then he kind of calmed down. But that was at 13 months. And then by about 18 months, we started noticing that Nicholas started losing his speech.
So he had words and then he
Oh
lost
yeah.
them.
And he was playing with his brother, back and forth. But then at starting about 18 months, things started regressing. And by the 24th month, he lost his ability to speak. He couldn't speak anymore.
Wow.
Um, and then we started trying to figure out what this is all about. We moved to Oklahoma, where my wife's parents lived, and so they could help provide care for the boys. They wanted, instead of putting them in a daycare, we wanted like that. So we moved out of Dallas, moved up to Oklahoma City, and we didn't think anything of it. I didn't understand vaccine or vaccine injury or whatever it was, and I only had maybe 3 or 4 vaccines as a kid. Is what I saw on my vaccine card, and that was it. And
Do you remember which ones you had?
smallpox twice. I had a sugar cube for the polio. It was an oral polio on a sugar cube.
Really?
And then the DPT. I did not have the measles. We had a measles party. Our neighborhood kids, we all got measles at the same time, and all the moms brought the kids over to our first one over to our house. And there's 6 or 7 of us all had measles at the same time. We stayed home from grade school. I think it was first grade, maybe second kindergarten or first grade, and we just watched cartoons and ate Jello and pudding and hang around for a few days.
So what do
Um,
you say to people that say that measles is a deadly disease?
can be, but not in the United States. And we'll get into that in more detail. If a child is severely malnourished, severely, I guess what's the word, malnutritious or whatever, excuse me,
Malnourished and
malnourished. Yeah, there we
yeah.
go. Um, get too many syllables in the word there. Um, yes, or if he's very dehydrated, then it can cause problems. But generally, measles is a very mild, mundane type disease. It's a rite of passage for most kids. And that's the way it should be.
And then you
But
have
because,
lifetime immunity after you have it. Yeah, I could go on and on about this. This is going to get me sidetracked because I've been learning a lot about breast milk and moms who had measles and are immune to it now. They actually give their baby immunity through breast milk. So there's no need to give them the MMR vaccine, especially like if they're drinking breast milk, they don't need it if the mom had measles. But now we're running into issues where babies are not protected because mom got vaccinated instead of getting measles, and the immunity is dropping off. So now we actually do have to worry about infants getting measles, which before we didn't have to because they were protected. So yeah, that's a sidetrack, but yeah, I'm very passionate about
Well,
this stuff.
well, you bring up something, and I like to explore it a little bit. Is that in 2017, um, the late great Dr. Tony Bark. She was a wonderful lady. I don't think you ever had a chance to listen to her, but she passed away a few years later. Tony Bark and I, Dr. Tony Bark and I, uh, we received an email from Dr. Peter Abe, who's probably one of the world's leading measles researchers. And he was over in Africa, and we were talking, discovering. He says you need to go back into the Easy Measles campaign, and I go, "What the hell's this?" Started digging around. 1990 and 91, there was huge measles outbreaks in the United States. In 1989, CDC decided they were going to do some experiments. And one of the experiments was taking experimental measles that has never been approved for administration to kids, and then increasing the titers up to 5 times the titers. So it's a very concentrated vaccine. We normally do not administer measles vaccines to children under the age of 12 months for the very reasons that you were talking about. Maternal antibodies transferring to the child are very strong, and therefore they'll defeat any type of measles vaccine um, up until about 12 months of age. So they were going to try to do something, and then what they were going to try to do is CDC, along with Kaiser Permanente out there in California, they identified some areas they wanted to go in and do some experimenting, if you will, and that's really what it was. Um, they identified an area in Los Angeles County, and they wanted to go in and find very heavily prevalent neighborhoods. So what we did is we started going in and digging into this and saying, what's going on here? In 1990 and 91, they went into 4 areas within LA County and applied or administered an experimental vaccine that's 5 times the titers to children as young as 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
And they wanted to see if this would help defeat or stop the massive spread of measles in the United States. They told the parents they didn't tell them this was an experimental vaccine. They didn't tell them that it was not approved. They just gave them a little piece of paper to sign to before they administer the vaccine. So it was truly uninformed consent. There
Yeah.
was no informed consent at all. What we found out is that we identified some areas. They went into, instead of going into the most heavily prevalent measles areas, they went into the very low social and economic class areas. I think on purpose, because there
Yeah.
would be no pushback from
Mhm.
the parents legally or whatever way. So it was kind of it was deceiving at best. And we found, talking to Tony and I went out to LA. We found a couple Baptist ministers. We were trying to track these parents down. They told us that there was a lot of parents who had kids who suffered seizures, other autoimmune disorders, and we were trying to find them. And at the time, they would have been 27 years old, give or take 27, 28 years old, but we couldn't find them. And the reason why is that a year and a half later, after this experiment, the Rodney King riots happened, and those areas were torched. They
Mm.
were just, and so it was all cleared out. These people moved everywhere else, and he had no idea. There was no good records. The Los Angeles County Health Department refused to provide names and addresses or whatever of the people who were received the vaccines. So we couldn't go anywhere with that. And but the Baptist minister said, "Hey, yeah, there's a lot of parents that." So we have no idea what's happened to these kids. But this
Wow.
is what we also found is in 1996 is in Pediatrics Journal that was quoted. A CDC official was quoted. They didn't after they found that this experiment was basically a waste of time and didn't do what they thought it would do. They said, we're not really worried about it because sooner or later we're going to get all these girls are going to be mothers, and we're going to get them vaccinated anyway. So eventually they're going to all be vaccinated. What the goal was is to get rid of maternal antibodies. That's what CDC was trying to do, and get
That's
everybody
crazy.
dependent on vaccines, because it was a mess. So yeah, there is our government has never been truthful and has been deceiving and lying to us for a long period of time. They're trying to figure out ways of tricking Mother Nature, and you really
Mm,
can't trick
yep.
Mother Nature when it gets to disease and viral illness and bacterial illness. You can't do that. You can combat it a little bit, but you have to understand you have to work with Mother Nature, and in this case, they try to eliminate maternal antibodies. And
Yeah, and it's
unfortunately,
crazy.
today it's the way it is.
And people swear up and down that the best medical invention was vaccines, which I vehemently oppose. I think the best two things came from the medical community: sanitation, just washing our hands, and like indoor plumbing has helped us a lot get rid of disease, and antibiotics, which comes from nature. So, yeah, we need to stop playing God and just use the resources He gave us. And like I said, if you look into everything that is involved with breast milk, that is the best medicine that's secure, not vaccines and playing God. So, yeah, that's really disturbing. And I don't know what it is because I feel like if you ask most people, do you trust the government? Most people say no, but yet they just trust the government. And when they tell them to take, here's 80 vaccines to give this child when it used to be three, like I don't get it. I don't know where the mindset comes from. I think it's also in line with the deterioration of our education system over time. Like have just taught they just have taught people how to be coerced, and propaganda works, I guess. So that's what they've been using all this time. But let's get back to your story about your son. So, you saw this immediate reaction, which is crazy. I honestly, I haven't heard a story like that. I've heard stories where, a child gets vaccinated and then months later, I mean, like you talked about, months later, you could see the regression, but you saw an instant reaction. So, what did you do from there when you started to realize that he was getting worse?
The anaphylactic reaction, allergic reaction, is actually pretty common.
Mm,
Well, it's not one out of every two, one out of every three, but it's maybe one out of every 15, 20 kids. You'll
okay.
have an allergic reaction of some sort. The allergic reaction in my son's case was very severe. Other cases, they could generate hives. They can have an abscess develop on where the needle went into the skin, stuff like this. But we were told by the pediatricians everything's going to be fine. It just is like this. We started losing a little bit and really didn't know what to go on. My wife was kind of concerned, and she started talking about the A word, but she wouldn't say the whole word. And we were up in Oklahoma at the time. And so we got a little bit of some social services to come and work with our son, a couple hours a week. And that was all that was available. And it wasn't until probably Nick was about three that we said, wait, we got a problem here. Um, I didn't know much about the vaccine issue at all. I really didn't. My wife started figuring things out. And we went to we were in Oklahoma City, and we made an appointment to visit with someone to look at whether or not there was an autism diagnosis. And it took us about 18 months to get into one. And it was a
Oh.
Columbia University trained psychiatrist that was living in, she was practicing in Tulsa at the time. So we drove to Tulsa, and it was a 2-day uh, type of a screening where we meet with her for 3 or 4 hours. It was about 3 or 4 hours one day, and then come back for another couple hours session the next day. So we went to Tulsa, stayed over in Tulsa, and then come back the next. And she says, yes, your son has regressive autism. I don't know much about it. So she went in and she Xeroxed 2 pages out of a textbook that she had from Columbia University.
She said
She,
she didn't know much about it, or you
she
didn't
didn't
know
know
much?
she didn't know what could be done. She thought it was this is it. Didn't really know if it could be reversed or anything about it. Yet she gave us
Wow.
this is autism. Now you got to think about it. This is 2003, give or take. And then she said, here's a prescription for Ritalin. And we come out, put the boys into our van, and in the parking lot, my wife tears up the Ritalin prescription and just leaves it on the on the asphalt there. So we driving home and going, what the hell's going on? Then she starts digging into this. I was busy trying to figure out. We were trying to expand services for our son Nick. Insurance companies weren't covering things. We're getting these denials coming back for medical treatments and stuff like this. And she figured it out that we got a vaccine injury, and that was the first time we wait a minute, what's going on here? She found Barbara Fisher's group, mbic.org. Barbara Fisher being one of the three parents that actually lobbied with Congress to create the MBICP back in 1986. But on there was a resource area for attorneys. She contacted an attorney and said, send me all the medical records. So we had 3 banker's boxes full of medical records for Nick. Sent
Mm-hmm.
them up to his office in Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. He comes back a few weeks later and says, you got a great case of vaccine-induced encephalopathy, except for one problem. You're time barred, meaning the vaccine court, or what we call the MVICP, has statute of limitations. It's 3 years from the first symptoms to filing, and anything longer than that, you're not eligible to file for compensation. We were
That's
three
insane.
we were 3 years, 9 months. So we couldn't, and so it took a while to wait a minute, what the hell's this about? And it kind of stuck with me. But at the same time, I was busy trying to figure out, we knew we had autism. So how do we help? Can we get medical services? Can we get clinical help, therapy? And insurance companies in Oklahoma would not provide coverage. Matter of fact, the battle got really ugly there a couple of years later. But at the time, there was only one state that actually mandated insurance companies for autism, and that was Indiana.
Mm.
Then came South Carolina, and that's where I met some people. I flew out to South Carolina, met some people there, but they had a conference of basically advocates and parents, and we started talking about insurance coverage. And I brought this back, and in Oklahoma, we really started the press 2007, 2008, 2009. And Oklahoma became ground zero for a nasty battle for insurance coverage. And I was at the state capitol. We were fighting tooth and nail. We had parents, everywhere showing up. We had their bringing kids in the red wagons up to the capitol, and it was actually making a lot of the legislators really mad, because how dare people question, you know, you know, they thought,
Oh man,
we,
how
but
dare you guys ask me to do my job?
that's right. And the media started turning to become our friends, the local media.
Wow.
And the parents were being treated as rock stars. It was incredible. It got to the point where the Speaker of the House in this Oklahoma legislature got up to the podium there on the floor of the House, said if the Rohde family wants to have insurance coverage, they need to move to another state. They singled us out. Well, we kept pressing and pressing, but it just couldn't. And in 2010, we decided we had enough. We were going bankrupt. I mean, we were spending $3,000 out of pocket each month,
Wow.
cash, to pay for treatments and therapies.
So how
And
did your life change around this time? I mean, you said that you and your wife were working when you like first
right.
met. So were you still selling computer systems? Was she still working for government? Like what kind of happened during that period?
Well, she moved on from the city of Oklahoma City to the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center,
Mm.
and she was doing IT compliance work for them. And yes, I was still selling computer software, but I took a lot of time away from that business. And I was fighting tooth and nail for my son, and I wasn't going to give up. But it was just the emotional toll on us, on our family, and it was just destroying. We saw families just getting destroyed. Our marriage was just going nuts, going was breaking down. The financial toll was there. Our extended family didn't even, didn't want to talk to us about this because they're going, how dare you go in and ask, you want government controlled healthcare? And I said, no, we don't. What we want to do is have insurance required to provide coverage. Let the insurance market determine the rates, determine the service providers. We're not asking government to run it. They
Mhm.
didn't understand that concept. But when you have the Chamber of Commerce and the industry, the insurance industry, opposed to you, and it was a big battle. So we said, well, enough is enough. And my wife got recruited for a company up in Minnesota, to go work for a bank up there. And so we decided, okay, we'll do that. And we moved to Minnesota. But at that time, um, the couple of the authors of the paper who I knew prior to their publishing, this is in 2010, they said, you know what? You guys have really fought a good fight here. And I went back to them, I said, and to Lou Conte, and I said, you know what? This all is about vaccines. What is this MVICP? And Lou says, well, this is it's a process where you can actually go in and seek compensation. I said, yeah, I know that, but we were told we were time barred. And then Lou says, Wayne, you need to talk to other families about this. So that's what I started doing. Is I started finding other families, and I stayed away from the autism side of this thing because I wanted to understand what it was like for families that have maybe um, had other type of family members injured from other vaccines, and the medical outcome was not going to be autism, seizures, whatever else. And I started recording this and writing this down, and ended up about 285 families I interviewed.
Wow.
But the problem here, well, I shouldn't say a problem, is I got into the hepatitis B issue. And this is where it gets really ugly as far as the vaccine program here in the United States. Hepatitis B was not approved for anybody less than the age of, I think, 6 at the time. But we're giving it to them at first day of life.
Yeah.
And I found several families who lost their children within 1 to 2 days or 3 days. And I talked to some. And that was difficult interviews. I've never interviewed parents who lost their babies. And it got difficult, but I found a few people that were willing to talk. And I just sat there and listened. and
Which is
it gets,
probably more than most people have done. Like, people like to throw around, "Oh, listen to the experts." Like, I'm only gonna listen to the experts, not crazy people, whatever. But the experts are not doing that. The experts are not sitting down listening to family after family, or they just say, "Oh, it's genetic," which is funny that you have twins, like, what are they saying now? What are they saying that you have twins and they're not both autistic, you know? So, yeah, I think you did more than most experts have ever done.
I don't think there's really a good medical expert out there that's supporting vaccines out there. There's really no. Yes, I've been called anti-vaxxer. What the heck, I've lived through the damage of it with my son. But as I started getting these families, Lou reached out to. He knew Tony Lyons, the publisher of Skyhorse Publishing there in New York City, and Lou helped me get a book deal put together. And Tony wanted a thing about the process, this MVICP and parents interviews. So I said, okay, I'll start writing it. I've never written a book. Um, my college upbringing is economics, but it was really golf and drinking Budweiser. Uh, I had furthest from the literary world, like this. But he gave me a couple different editors to start working with, and I started writing, and but I got to know the process. The MBICP was basically born in 1986, and we all know that President Reagan signed it into law, but he refused at the beginning. But it was part of a bigger budget reconciliation with defense spending and things like this. But he did not want this, and it was this vice president and secretary Baker that basically drug him, just pulled him along and put the pen in his hand and said, sign this damn thing because we needed money for the budget for the defense. And but he did not want the executive branch to be involved in this, and this is exactly what this is. The
Mhm.
MVICP in its core is an administrative process. You cannot sue the vaccine manufacturers at first. Buffalo Fisher negotiated with Congress, and they built into the program where you had to file a petition seeking compensation with what would they call the Federal Court of Claims. Anybody been into Washington D.C. And gone by the White House to the far see be the north, I think northeast corner, there's a big, huge red brick building. That's the Federal Court of Claims. That's the only place in the United States where you can sue the federal government for VA benefits, tax court, all these other administrative processes. And you have actually judges there that handle that. Well, the MBICP is housed in that area. And what it is, it's a process. HRSA, a division of Department of Health and Human Services, is the what we call the respondent. They represent the government. So when you file a petition seeking compensation, you're actually suing HHS, not the manufacturer, okay, for seeking compensation.
Which
The
is
original,
our tax dollars. So our tax dollars are representing somewhat, like, representing the vaccine companies for injuring an American, like, and they know that their products can injure people, and that's why the Vaccine Act was passed in the first place, because they have said that there are unavoidable injuries that are going to happen, and that's why we need protection against liability, which is just insane to me. So we are
well,
paying for this.
when I was writing the book, I started digging into that. I think that was a big lie that pharma sold to Congress. Actually, what was happening, yes, there was lawsuits in the late 70s and early 80s. There was very successful lawsuits of people who had children who died or severely injured from the DPT and DTB, actually at that time, vaccine. It was a very dirty vaccine. No one really knew how the damn thing worked, but it's been there for 20, 30 years. And it was working to stop. Most of the time, we were looking for whooping cough, because whooping cough on a toddler is dangerous. But the vaccine was used to combat that. Okay. But it was also causing, hundreds and hundreds of deaths and thousands of severe injuries, including seizures in kids. So there was a few successful lawsuits. Pharma was saying, hey, we're going to go out of business because we can't afford this. Well, here's the real nut about this is that there is insurance companies for property liability that were insuring the pharmaceutical industry. They were raising their rates higher because they're the ones funding these lawsuit losses. And pharma was going to get to the point where they were no longer going to have insurance coverage against these losses. So that's how they sold it to Congress. Congress bought the lie, provided legal immunity at the beginning, and said, "Okay, we're going to do this." However, people who file petitions after 240 days can actually exit the program, reject any decisions, and then take their chances in state court or federal court for injury. It's what we call Section 23 of the Act. Okay, that stood the time until 2011. So you had the ability prior to February of 2011 to exit the program and sue. The problem is that I started digging into this. There wasn't that many people that actually exited the program and were successful suing. And what
What
tells
about in
you,
your case where you passed the statute of limitation for this vaccine court? Would
see,
you still be
but you
allowed to?
still had to file in the MVICP at the beginning. We could not file.
Mm,
There was nothing we could do. Okay. Yes, I could try to go to state court, but I didn't have millions of dollars to fund
mm.
an independent lawsuit with research. So you're going up. It's just like tobacco. People were trying to sue tobacco in the beginning for, lung cancer and everything else, and they were losing. This is how crooked these big, huge industries are and how they control the legal system in the United States.
Yeah, one of my friends that I've had her on the show, she said, you get the justice you can afford. And it's so sad. And it's so true. And it's very unfortunate. And that's not, I don't think that's what the founding fathers had anticipated. And I mean, here it's not even that. Like you're talking about immunity. It's not even the justice you can afford. There's no justice at all here. And it's just insane to me.
Right. So you have this program. Well, the Congress also put in what we call an excise tax, a levy, to help pay for compensation. And it's 75 cents per antigen sold in the United States, not distributed, but sold. So you have hepatitis B, 75 cents for every vaccine sold in the United States. The manufacturers would then submit this on a monthly basis to the US Treasury. MMR was 3 antigens, so that's 225. So this money was coming in. And then that's what is paid for compensation and attorney fees and medical expert fees and all this. So people say, well, okay, that's a tax on sales. Well, here's the other rub about that. We know as of probably the last decade or so, the largest purchaser of vaccines is the US government. About 54%, we estimate, of all sales is US government for DOD, for all the different CDC vaccine programs for children and everything else. So yes, now you have taxpayer money. Majority of the money in the trust fund is from taxpayer money. Okay.
Well, I would argue I actually had this conversation with someone recently because they were like they had no idea anything about this stuff and they were trying to fight with me about it. On Facebook, of course. It's that's where all the good conversations are. And they're like, "No, you're wrong. Like you can sue in vaccine injury court and it's funded by the vaccine manufacturers. They have to pay a certain amount, just like what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good, but who actually pays that tax? So what you're saying is the government, they buy directly the vaccines, about over 50% of them anyway. But we all know that when, even if you have private insurance, whatnot, you are still paying that tax. Like they are just incorporating it in the price that your insurance, or if you pay cash, that they pay. So really, the vaccine manufacturers have there's nothing that they do when they injure someone. It's our money going to fund their negligence. That's it. And it's just insane. This whole thing is insane.
Well, the other part is that think about all the Medicaid, Medicare dollars and Social Security dollar, or not, shouldn't say Social Security, but Medicaid, Medicare dollars that pay for vaccines.
Yep.
Okay, that's taxpayer money. Okay. Now here's another problem with this. You have this trust fund right now. Currently, $4.4 billion is the balance sheet. U.S. Treasury reports, and they produce a monthly report on spreadsheets that you cannot even understand. It is unbelievable how convoluted and just crazy. But the money is actually, there's no money.
Because so many
U.S.
people are getting injured, I'm sure.
Well, no. U.S. Treasury gets it. Uncle Sam receives it, and then they issue IOUs, T-bills, T-bonds, T-notes, and then they use the cash to the general fund for whatever that money goes to, highway funds, wars, whatever. Gone. The actual cash liquidity is around about 250,000. I mean, 250 million. And the reason why there's that liquidity cash is there because that's about how much is paid out each year. So you have this trust fund that has full of IOUs from the government, and there's really no liquidity in the trust fund trust fund itself. So the government uses the cash for other things. We also found out that it's not 75 cents anymore. When I was reviewing for my first book, I found IRS code of certain what we call trust funds that the United States administers, the Black Lung Trust Fund and a few others. They take 25% right off the top. So it's actually 59.5 cents per antigen that gets put into this trust fund, not 75 cents. And I had to confirm that. So the way I confirmed it is that HHS official in a advisory meeting back in 2009, I found the minutes to a meeting where they said, yes, it's 25% goes right off the top. So now you have the motivation. The federal government likes this program because it makes money for them.
Yep.
Okay. So once again, so you have the program. Now, factor in that you have to file within the MVICP first. Up until February of 2011, you could exit the program, and from there, take your chances in state court. Well, prior to that, in 2009, President Obama needed what we call the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, had to pass. And he needed pharma to help him move it through Congress. And he got it. But it's my speculation and several other people. The big thank you to pharma came in February of 2011 in the Supreme Court case of Bruisewitz versus Wyeth Labs, where the Supreme Court ruling in a 6-2 decision, Justice Kagan had to recuse herself because she was part of a lower court case ruling involving this case, that the exclusive remedy for vaccine injury is the MVICP. So they removed what we call Section 23 of the Act. So you no longer can sue for injury.
which is just insane. I remember reading about that, and I was asking like ChatGPT and Grok, going back and forth between the two, asking like, how is any of this constitutional? It just drives me insane. And it said that that case really set the stage, and no one's really touched the Vaccine Act ever since that case. And but really, when you get down to it, it didn't look at whether that act was constitutional or not. It was just like what you just said, like that it just said you can't sue based on any injury. That when the act was first written, the intent was no injuries you can sue over with the manufacturer. So it's insane. And then I kind of backtracked it. I talked about it a little bit last week with my friend Dustin, that's also a lawyer. And it comes from a 1977 case with OSHA. Someone sued OSHA, and they determined that no, OSHA has a remedy. So you can't sue people outside of the system that the government created. Just it was just this really bad domino effect, and we really
Mhm.
need some good lawyers to go after this, because that should be overturned. And all of this, I just don't understand when you read the Seventh Amendment in plain English, like, how do you get around that? It makes no sense to me. And it goes against the three branches of government, not just the Seventh Amendment, but just the three branches of government in general. You have the executive branch, which is supposed to execute the laws that Congress makes, and they're really taking on the role of the judicial branch, which makes no sense. So, and it's causing so many problems. The fact that it's only 3 years, I have such an issue with that, because how many parents really comprehend and understand that, okay, this injury might possibly be because of this vaccine that I gave this many years ago. I'm sure it's probably a little over 3 years people start to realize that, and that's why they've made it 3 years of the statute of limitations.
The thing here is that back when the act first was passed, they were looking at only 7 vaccines at the time for children. Okay, measles, mumps, and rubella were 3, and they were individual. Okay, they
Yeah.
weren't lumps together. And by the way, measles vaccine at the time had a very good safety profile. As a standalone vaccine for a healthy child, it had a very good safety profile. Rubella caused some problems a little bit. Mumps was a worthless vaccine anyway. Then you had the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, the whooping cough. Tetanus is you don't give, it doesn't make sense medically to give a tetanus vaccine to someone who's already stepped on a rusty nail. It doesn't work that way, but that's where it was. And then you had the oral polio, which there was problems with oral polio, but that was your 7. But it was also, they named the vaccine medical outcomes. Seizure disorder was the big one. Encephalopathy, there was death. That was basically it. What we didn't know, what we see now, is the growth of what we call autoimmune disorders. And those didn't generally come out of those 7. It came out of the next group of vaccines that were brought into the schedule, but then the combination of all these vaccines together. And they've really never been tested as far as when we bring in a vaccine, we generally like to do long-term testing, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in phase 3 testing. This is a way to tease out if there's any infertility issues or autoimmune issues. Of course, well, a lot of us that understood that knew when the COVID vaccine was rushed to market, that was a limit. That was never the case.
Yeah.
But these childhood vaccines, they growth from 1986 to what we have now is what? There's 17. And then the big problem we have is the combination of them. They start putting hepatitis A and hepatitis B together. Then they put DTaP, the old DPT vaccine was removed from the market, and then they put in this DTaP, and then they add Hib and IP, polio and a few other things together. Those are really have never been tested for any type of autoimmune disorders, infertility, and anything else that make long term. So yes, the statute of limitations is 3. It should be 6. It should be 8. And it could even be worth state law. I believe, like in certain states, up until the child reaches majority age, meaning 18. Every time there's been a push to try to increase the statute of limitations, there's been a huge push by the pharma lobby to stop it. The last person to try to really move the statute of limitations was Congressman Dan Burton. He held hearings back in 1990 and 99 and 2000 about thimerosal and mercury and a few other things because of his grandson developing autism.
Mm.
He kept pushing for the statute of limitations to be moved to 5 years to 6 years. And what was interesting is pharma got a candidate and they primaried him. The Republican Party primaried Dan Burton back in 2005. And they
Wow.
gave that guy a ton of money. So Burton got the message. He understood that we cannot touch this sacred cow, if you will, which is the MDICP, because even the Republican Party at the time didn't want that to happen. They loved pharma money. And then
And it's just crazy. Like,
yeah.
I love pointing to this graphic. It's my favorite one because
Oh,
it
yeah.
literally says, and this is not about vaccines. This is just a very medication safety, it says. And it says there are risks in taking any medicine, vitamin, or other supplement. But the minute you start talking about how a vaccine can have side effects, people get so crazy, so cult like, what are you talking about? It saves lives. And I pulled some screenshots from the vaccine court website, is right on the top of their website. And the first thing it says is vaccines save lives by preventing disease. And it says most people who get vaccines have no serious problems. Vaccines, like any medications, can cause side effects. But why, when you say that, it like you're canceled, you're anti-vax if you think that it causes side effects? Like, it's not new. We know that vaccines can cause side effects just like any other medication. But the minute you talk about it, you're censored, you're crazy, you're anti vax, all of these things. And it's like, no, we're just telling you the truth. People like yourself, we have so many stories on how you have this healthy child that is speaking and growing, and you know that they're healthy, and then all of a sudden right before your eyes you see them start to regress, they lose their language, and you saw the instant reaction,
Mhm.
and yet you've been called anti-vax when you know that there was a problem. And that's crazy. And honestly, someone called me anti-vax the other day, like it was going to hurt my feelings. And like, I don't even care anymore. We're so past that. Like, this is just telling the truth. Okay. And, a lot of people who are, traditionally anti-vax, a lot of people are just advocating that you break apart these vaccines. So you're not giving the MMR, like 3 vaccines in one on top of all the others. A lot of people are just advocating, like, break them apart, just have single dose vaccines and spread them out. And it's especially concerning that they give so many at one time, talking about vaccine court, because how do you know what injury is attributed to what vaccine if you're overdosing them with 10,000 vaccines? Not actually 10,000, but a lot of vaccines all at once. Like, how do you know where that injury came from? And I feel like that's by design, to confuse people and to not know exactly where these injuries came from.
Correct. And it takes an experienced attorney that is well experienced in the MVICP. And so let's talk about this process and how they determine medical outcomes from what type of vaccines. So you're filing a petition and it goes to the HRSA, which is a division of HHS, and they look at the petition and to decide whether or not it's compensable or not. And then if it's not, then then the parties can decide if they want to proceed or dismiss it. But the attorneys that represent you are actually can be and should be and shall be paid by the trust fund. So you're not really out the thousands of dollars for an attorney. Their fees and expenses are paid for by the trust fund, along with the medical experts that they have to hire to testify on your behalf. The flip side is that the government is represented by DOJ attorneys in the Civil Torts Division. They represent the government, the respondent, and then they hire medical experts to testify on their behalf. So you have two parties, you and your attorney and medical experts, if you need them. And the other side is their DOJ attorneys and medical experts if they need them. A special master is assigned. It's not a judge. He's a special master. And he looks at this process and says, okay, can we move forward with this? Is there a settlement offer to be made, or is there a concession to be made? Or am I going to have to dismiss this? Or are we going to have a hearing where we're going to actually have testimony? Now, this is not an open court process. There is no judge, jury at this point. Okay. And then the decisions are made. Generally, if there is a compensable case, meaning the petitioner is going to be awarded damages, most of the time it's because of what we call a stipulation, a joint stipulation, which is an agreement, a settlement. And the government does not concede any injury, but they're going to say, hey, we're going to just settle this case and get it off our plate, so to speak. And when they move forward, if it's dismissed, it's dismissed. When it's dismissed, this is where it does get into the courts, an actual judge, if you will, because the first step of review is the Federal Court of Claims, and it's a one judge that's looking at the decision and say, did the special master rule according to law? Not according to whether or not they think that the petitioner was injured, but according to the law. And if that's the case, then the petitioner is motion for what we call review is denied. Then the petitioner has to make a decision. Do we want to appeal? Well, they can appeal up to what we call the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a 3-judge panel there in DC, and it's one step below the U.S. Supreme Court. So then a 3-judge panel will look at it and hold oral arguments. And there is no jury here still, but it's oral arguments. And then from there, they can, depends on what they do. If the petitioner loses there, then they can file a petition to go up to the Supreme Court. Chances are those writs are not going to be heard. But that's where you have the federal judicial system involved in. There's never a jury. Now, if you win, the federal government has the ability to appeal the decision too. So, just because you won on the lower level, they can appeal up. And that's what's currently happening. SIDS cases are interesting. Is that I interviewed several families who lost kids from their babies from SIDS. In the beginning, this process, we were awarding SIDS cases. All you had is medical records. Doctors were saying, yeah, died within 24 hours, 48 hours. And yeah, it's SIDS, and then they'll award damages on that. And the damage, get this, the damage award is limited to $250, $250,000 for death. That's the limit. $250,000 if your family member dies. That's the max. And then it can be negotiated downward. It's infuriating, but this is what it is.
And for someone like, let's say you were able to sue in vaccine injury court, what about if you got justice for your son? How much would you have gotten?
Well, that depends on either the settlement or the concession, and then the workout of the agreement. There's a lot of cases where kids were awarded millions of dollars, and the way they do that, it's not money in the bank. It's in the form of what we call annuities for future medical care. So a trustee is appointed. The life care planners, I'm representing both sides, both parties come in, and then they try to figure out how much money is going to be needed for the rest of the lives of this individual. all the ingredients, medications, supplies, residential nursing care, everything. And an annuity is then sold by the Secretary of HHS to a life insurance company for X number of dollars, and then it's to cover this. So the present value could be 2 million, but it could be worth 25 million by the child when
Yeah.
the child reaches 60, 65, if they're still living at the time. Here's the other thing is that if that person dies, whatever's remaining in that annuity contract comes back to the Secretary of HHS. It's never the property of the injured person. So you have the Secretary of HHS actually owns these annuities.
Mm.
There was a scare during the Wall Street meltdown in 2008 that I found out during researching the first book when Wall Street was melting down. Some of these life insurance companies were teetering on whether they were going to go bankrupt. And these life insurance annuities are supposed to be guaranteed, but they're not. And there was a slowdown in payments, and there was a concern there that it didn't reach the news, but there was a lot of annuity contracts out, and whether or not those are going to be paid for the care for those individuals was in question. But
Which is
thank goodness I
insane.
never. Yeah, it's crazy. The annuity game here, and the thing is, it's supposed to be there's brokers that actually will place the annuity with a life insurance company. It's supposed to be an open process and an open bid process, but it's actually one person or two people that actually get them all. And they've made hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 30 years placing annuities. And it's a scam there too. So this is corrupt in all different areas, but no one wants to open up that Pandora's box.
And the
Um,
taxpayers are paying for everything. The taxpayers are
Essentially, yes.
representing the
Mhm.
families that are injured. The taxpayers are also representing the government. So you're
Right.
representing each other in court.
Mhm.
If there is a payout, the taxpayers are funding that. Like there is zero accountability with the actual manufacturers of these vaccines, and they know that their vaccines can cause injury, but they are hiding from the free market. And I'm sure if we took away their little liability, not liability, but immunity, they would take so many vaccines off the market, or at least, like what we said, split them up, spread them out. They're, in my opinion, I'm not a medical professional, but I do know how to read and I do have a brain. An infant that is on breast milk does not need any vaccine. They are getting immunity from their mother. And like I said, it was incredible to watch because when Kennedy was in his confirmation hearing and Senator Rand Paul and oh, what's the other one? I know his name. He bothers me so much. Who's the pharma
You're
shill?
talking about uh,
The
from
pharma shill.
Oklahoma? Oh,
Is
no.
he in Oklahoma? Bill
Mark Wayne,
Cassidy. Bill Cassidy. Okay, so
Cassidy from Louisiana, the chair of the committee. Yeah.
yeah. So Bill Cassidy and Rand Paul, both doctors, were going back and forth in the confirmation hearing, talking about, okay, well, a baby doesn't need what's the vaccine on day one? I always forget the name of it.
Hepatitis B.
So they were talking about that vaccine, saying, does a child really need it? And Bill Cassidy was like, well, if we don't know the status of the mother, then yes. And Rand Paul was like, okay, but if we do know the status of the mother, then the baby doesn't need it. And Bill Cassidy was like, yeah, you're right. Like if we know the status of the mom, then and the mom's negative, then the baby doesn't need it. And like right there, right on TV, like we had that's what we need. We need open medical discussions. We don't need to just blanket statements say every child needs this vaccine day 1 when that's not the case. And you saw two doctors saying this, and yet Bill Cassidy is still every day saying you need to get your vaccines. They save lives, all this, even though they in person, they know how to have like a true human discussion and use their brain. But, pharma pays them off. So,
Here's the thing: is it's a simple blood test, a finger prick, and they know within 10 minutes if the mother is hepatitis B positive. They can do it on a finger prick. And it's less than 1% of all pregnant mothers anyway. So I think they're also using it to protect the hospital from liability, more than and the doctor, the OBGYNs and everybody. It's more to protect them. The worry about a pregnant mother being hepatitis B positive is way down the list.
Yeah.
It's this is totally insane. So
Mhm.
but we're protecting the vaccine program, and here's where the MBICP has even gone to further extent. We used to compensate SIDS. Okay, we no longer do. Yet there is
Really?
one case that just got compensated earlier in January, but it's being appealed by the federal government. It's going to find the right judge to shoot it down. So they're judge shopping, and they're going to get it done and shoot it down.
Wow.
DTaP vaccine has been shown to cause what we call early onset of seizures and epilepsy in kids and a subset of kids. Well, the government back in 2014 found a real small study out of Australia, the Berkovich study, that kind of concluded that, yeah, the early onset of seizures and epilepsy is not due to the DTaP vaccine. It's due to a gene mutation, what we call the SCN1A gene mutation. It's an incredibly bizarre way of finding it. So they've incorporated that into the review process, into the federal court of claims and the federal circuit. So it's kind of written in stone that if you have a claim of DTaP causing epilepsy or seizures, you have to be tested for this gene mutation first. And if that gene mutation is there, then your case is dismissed automatically. Well, we now know that that gene mutation is not a good indicator of that. But that's
This is
where
so
so you,
messed up.
so you have this, yeah. So you have that. You have Gardasil. Here's the problem when you talked about statute of limitations. When Gardasil first was approved in 2007, along with hepatitis A, there was no injury no injury included with it. Generally, when you add a vaccine, you have to add a vaccine table, an injury table with it. And the only one they added was death. But with Gardasil, it was causing a lot of problems. Now, I don't know much about teenage girls' menstrual cycle science, but I know that their periods are not stable. They're not, it doesn't happen quite a bit, especially with younger teenage girls.
Mhm.
Well, they were giving girls as young as 11 and 12 years of age this Gardasil vaccine. 10 years later, they are now thinking, well, maybe I'm going to start, or 15 years later, I'm going to start um, thinking about having children. Or why am I not having a monthly
Mhm.
period? They're finding out that they're sterile. Okay. Statute of limitations is already run. They
Yep.
have no recourse, none
Yep.
whatsoever, as far as the vaccine injury. I talked to a mother over in Wisconsin who had two daughters. Both of them are sterile.
It's insane. Is this the
And
one too that they say that prevents cancer?
yeah, but it doesn't.
Yeah, they
It
tried
just
to give it
shifts.
to
It
me.
just shifts it to
They tried
other.
to give it to me when I was like 20, and I was like, I think I'm fine. I don't know. And that's what's funny is like I've never been anti-vaccine, but I listen and I'm like, okay, how would I get it? Especially like sexually transmitted ones. I'm like, I don't need that. My husband's my one and only. We're fine. We're good. Like I don't need any of that. But you start like, using common sense and people call you anti-vax. And again, it's like they do that to the baby. Like, why are they giving babies vaccines that they would only get something if it was sexually transmitted or a dirty needle? It doesn't make sense why you would do that. So we should be questioning these things, and it's absolutely ridiculous. The statute of limitations, like ridiculousness from all angles right now.
When Gardasil was first brought onto the scene, it was promoted to stop they said that we believe it'll prevent ovarian cancer. Now, ovarian cancers at the time didn't develop in most women until at least their 50s. Okay. And if you were doing your regular checkups with your doctor
Hmm.
in your 20s and 30s, most of the time, all that would be cleared out and you wouldn't have these issues. But then they started giving, so they marketed Gardasil to prevent ovarian cancer. Then that was shown that was kind of faulty science. So now you see with all these other cancers and whatever else. But here's the problem: we're starting to see the prevalence of ovarian cancer becoming earlier
Yep.
in the 40s, much like Alzheimer's was generally in the late 70s and 80s. Now we're starting to see it as young as 50s.
And
Uh,
the common thing here with that is, so, we all know that they really don't study autism, probably on purpose, because they don't want us to know what the real causes are. And it's very true with women's health too. A lot of the stuff like fertility is really not studied. Like I looked up, the fertility rates, and it just said like it takes a woman about a year to get pregnant, but there's really not much data, like how many women are sterile and stuff, like we really don't know what it looks like today compared to back then, 10, 20, 30 years ago. We don't know. And it just makes you wonder, are they not doing the research on purpose? Because we know that there's a problem. Um, exactly what you're talking about. Like women should have consistent cycles. You should have, I think it's like, I don't know, 24 days. Every 24 days, you should have a period. And that is not happening. A lot of my friends do not have consistent periods. And we need to ask why. Is it the vaccines? Is it diet? Is it some kind of, poison in our food? We need to know. And I don't understand like why people get so frustrated when you say we need to do science. Like but then they'll say in the same breath, but follow the science. Okay, we're trying here. We're trying.
well, a couple years ago, I got into that. I started looking into it with my podcast, and I've interviewed a fertility specialist a couple years ago, and they were talking about the declining birth rates in industrial nations such as the United States. Why are our birth rates declining so rapidly? And that's concerning on many levels. One is that we're not, our population could be shrinking as far as natural born people here not having the number of kids to replace them in the future. But then I got connected with an owner of a sperm bank business. He's got 3 locations, and the way sperm banks are graded, 1 through 4, 4 being the best as far as quantity and the quality, he's seeing a dramatic decrease in sperm bank um, product, if you will. I don't know how you want to call it, but
It's fine.
um, so he's seeing it on the male side.
Mhm.
So fertility is a big problem. Now we got to figure, he can't connect it any further because privacy. They don't, his donors don't tell him their medical histories prior.
Yeah.
He's not allowed to collect that type of thing. But that tells me if you got young men who are going to the sperm bank and donating, and then the number of customers and then the quality is declining rapidly, that's a serious problem there with fertility. You see that with women, whether or not they'll be able to conceive. So whether it's Gardasil or whether it's other vaccines, we don't know. But Gardasil, we have these problems here where statute of limitations for fertility, and they're giving it to teenage boys now too. So
Mm.
who knows what's happening there? There's other types. Of course, you can't go and bring a claim for autism anymore. But what happens here is that the special masters also make decisions on what we call attorney fees. When the attorney who represents you is finished with your case, then they would submit a motion to the special master saying, I've spent X number of hours Here's what my paralegals of hours that they've done. Here's the number of hours our medical experts of done at their rates. Here's my rate per hour. I'm submitting a fee motion for $125,000 for the 3 years that I spent on this case. Well, the special masters are the ones that get to approve those, and they also have the discretion to reduce them if they want to. Here's the very problem with that, and that is that special masters will tell these attorneys, don't you dare bring a case for SIDS. Don't you dare bring a case for fertility. Don't you dare bring a case for autism. Don't you dare bring a case for some of these other seizure issues, because if you do, I'm going to hold you responsible, reduce your fees, and then I'm going to look at it for future cases. They're threatening
Wow.
the attorneys. So now these attorneys have become aggressive in their screening, because in my conversations with some of these, even currently this past week, I had a conversation with a couple of attorneys, about 10 to 1. They're getting 10 different parents calling them, and they're having to say no because they can't move that case forward for every one that they do take as a client and move it forward. So vaccine injury is more prevalent than we think it is. Okay.
Yeah, and
More
you
prevalent.
know, recently Kennedy, said in a speech that, you know, um, it's destroying that severe autism he was talking about, but people generalize it to all autism. But he said severe autism, these kids are not going to pay taxes or have a job. And a lot of people got into it with him about the money, like, what does it matter if they pay taxes? And it's not just autism. There's so many factors here, including fertility. It is going to be about money, whether we like it or not. Um, we're talking about our country is aging. We don't have enough young people that are going to take care of the aging population. And so they're all going to be on, our federal tax dollars, our dollars. We're going to have to take care of them. And it's not just the aging population now, it's also the people who are disabled, which severe autism, they're disabled. So we also have to pay for them. And it's like, I think it was one, because it's 1 in every 31 kids are diagnosed with autism. So I think it's, if I can do math, I think it's like 1 every 124 is severe autism. And that rate is going to keep increasing. And it's going to be more and more where our tax dollars have to pay for these disabled kids, now adults. And it's just at so many levels, like our money is going to have to go to all this, but then there's also less people that are in the workplace paying taxes. Like, not only is this a problem in terms of our budget, it's a moral crisis. Like, how are we doing this to our population? Like, we're disabling our kids, we're making them infertile. And it's also a national security problem because these people can never be, like, if we do have World War III, no one can be recruited. Oh my gosh, I can talk sometimes. But it's a problem all the way around. And Kennedy was correct to call that out, that this is a financial crisis. And to be honest with you, sometimes that's what you need to get Republicans' attention to care about an issue, is talk about the money aspect. Because we are severely in debt and this is a problem. So I don't know what we're gonna do. I don't know, like, especially like my generation, I don't know what we're gonna do. Like, we're gonna have to be paying. There's not gonna be any money left other than to pay for people to be completely taken care of 24/7. Like, there's no other option. I don't know. And really, it shouldn't be us paying for these things. It should be the vaccine manufacturers that are injuring people. That's really what it should be. So I have to ask you, Wayne, like, what can we do about this? Like, I mean, I don't want to sit and complain the whole time.
No, but
Um,
here, my son is severely autistic. He's going
mhm.
to require care for the rest of his life. He lives in pull-ups, nonverbal. We have to prepare his food for him, but he likes to run around the house, goes out in the backyard, plays on his trampoline. He's 27 years old.
Yeah.
How many parents do you know, or people you know, that have to clean up a 27-year-old man
Hmm.
because he can't use the toilet properly?
And a lot of people think that that your story is like fake. Like I was just blown away this last week. And if I need to have like the next 10 episodes and just make this a series at this point to talk about and actually have autism awareness, then that's what I'm going to do, because I was just disgusted this last week where people were saying Kennedy has no idea what he's talking about. There are people with autism that have jobs and are thriving, and one person even said that my kid is smarter than RFK Jr. and he's on the spectrum, just completely dismissing stories like your son. And I just can't believe that, because you guys have been silenced and censored and belittled for years and years. And the minute you get someone that's advocating for you, they go after him and just try to completely dismiss everyone with severe autism. And it's just disgusting to me.
Well, there's been a battle for quite a long time, and basically the self advocate group, which is basically the old the old label is called Asperger's.
Mhm.
On the spectrum, if you will, if you could look at, it was about, we estimated at one time anywhere from 15 to 18% of all the people that have Asperger's. Then you shift into what we call classic autism, moderate to severe, and then you go from there. Kennedy said about 25% of all autism is severe. That's probably accurate. Our government's never wanted to know, is never taking numbers, counting a census, if you will, for that reason. But it goes back to the battles of the self advocates. And in what we call the DSM-4 is the diagnostic manual for all
Yeah.
mental disorders and diseases that's used. The DSM-4 was the overriding definition of autism and Asperger's up until 2013. At 2013, the DSM-5 was published. The father, what we call the father of the DSM-4, his name is Dr. Alan Francis. And several of us met with him in the New York City area. And we met with him prior to the publishing, and he was very critical of those people, which was basically pharma and the psychiatric associations pushing for DSM-5 because it was a moneymaker for them to
Mm.
do this. And he was very critical and said, now you're going to have a battle where all the Asperger's is going to be molded into autism, and all the severe and moderate cases of autism are going to be pushed into the shadows. And that's exactly what's happened.
Exactly what's happened.
And that was there. So what you're seeing out there is all these people who have Asperger's or who are self-diagnosed, or
Mhm.
parents who self-diagnose their kids that probably don't have. If we went back to the DSM-4, we probably have 20% of this conversation would be gone because they're not included in autism. But that's because where it is. So you have this whitewashing, watering down. You have media talking about all these kids. NPR, I think it was yesterday, had a couple parents on of kids that are going to college. And I'm going, this is ridiculous.
It's
What's
crazy.
happening here? Um,
And I
you
have
have,
a picture of your son too.
yeah,
Oh, I put the wrong one. There we go. So,
and then
yeah, that's your son.
there he is. That's last year, and when we're
And
walking around,
I have to ask, because like, a lot of people I I think they just have never seen severe autism before. So, I mean, do you take him to like the grocery store with you and stuff? Like, I can imagine it's pretty difficult to do things like that.
he has trouble with noise.
Mhm.
So we can't take him shopping to shopping malls. We don't go to shopping malls anyway. Um, but he has trouble filtering out noises. As far as if he can see, he's got a tablet in front of him and listening to videos and music and stuff like that. That's fine. But if you get another conversation going with him in the same room, he has trouble with that.
Yeah.
My son doesn't injure other persons, but he does injure himself, and he bites his wrist quite often when he gets frustrated. That's
Yeah.
why you see a little wrist injuries, and
Yeah.
he's biting. You see around his wrists and stuff like this. When he gets frustrated, he'll bite his wrist and things like this.
Hmm.
Um, but he wears these shirts, and we take him out walking in the parks. His care provider, we have a shopping mall close to us where he can real quickly get into the mall and get on a carousel. That's an old fashioned carousel that's running, and he loves with that. I have an activity with him that I do every day, and that is I put him in the car. We drive around the neighborhoods in the late afternoon, early evenings. We pick up a couple orders of French fries for him, and he has his tablet. We're listening to music. Generally, it's Christmas music, so we're listening to Christmas music 365 days a week, days a year, and he's eating fries and looking around. But this is what we do for about an hour, hour and a half every night, and
Yeah.
this is something he wants to do.
Mm.
They're very habitual in the regards to the way they get into the car, how they walk around the car the right certain way, and is the way he does things at home. But that's on the severe end. There's other kids that are banging their heads a lot, punching holes into the walls. You don't see that. You see a lot of parents who have broken arms and wrists because their kids
Yeah.
are much bigger than they are, things like
Hmm.
this. This is what mainstream media and the public and our elected officials don't want people to know about. I'm having a big battle right now with our governor here in Minnesota, plus also a couple local radio stations. They got this. What happened on Thursday with the announcement, on Friday, there was a couple media messages out on popular radio saying we get what Secretary Kennedy is doing. He's identifying the 25%. What he's wanting to do is identify them and tell them they're worthless to provide funding. This is how he's going to cut Medicaid, Medicare by 25% because we don't want to spend money on these kids. We're going to just discard them. And I go,
Anyone
you
that's
got to be kidding me.
anyone that's watched Kennedy, I've followed Kennedy for like 2 years now, and you can tell this like hurts his soul to talk about this stuff because he doesn't this is not coming from a place of money to him. To him, this is about a morality thing. Like there is something that is injuring these children and he just wants to see them thrive. He doesn't want them to be in diapers and just to, exactly what you're saying, like that their whole life, the highlight of their day is just going to get fries and listen to Christmas music. Like he wants them to be a contributor to society and have their own family and have their own experiences. Um, and that's just not the story for a lot of people. And this is a very basic description, I guess, to talk about it without saying autism, because a lot of people just have like that fight or flight when you say autism nowadays. But I've told a couple people, what if your kid was born without arms? You would still love them, of course. But wouldn't you always wish that they had their arms so they could do things that normal people do? Doesn't mean you love them any less. And so that's exactly what Kennedy is saying. Like, we just want to give these kids their arms back. We want to give these kids their voice back. And, autism, a lot of times they don't have control over their arms and stuff. So it is a really good comparison in my mind. But that's all he's trying to say is like, if something's preventing you, I mean, I even hurt my wrist this week and it's bothering the crap out of me. I can't lift things and like only if I had my wrist back, it's just the little things. But for a lot of people, it's a lot of big things that add up. Like, don't you just want your life back? And, I don't know how people have twisted this to be such an evil thing. It really, when you look at Kennedy, he's coming from a good place. He has done what you've done. You've talked to many families and interviewed them. That's what he's done over time. He just started listening to moms and parents that are saying, like, no one's hearing us. I'm telling you, we had a healthy child. And the next day, they started to regress. They had words and then they didn't. And he was like the first major political figure that just listened That's all he did. That's his crime. He just listened to parents because parents know their kids and they know that they were healthy and something triggered it. It's not genetic. Maybe a little bit is. Maybe there's a vulnerability in genetics, but that doesn't tell the full story. So, man, I could go on and on. Obviously, I'm passionate about this. And
Here's the thing: it's really turned political now because
yeah.
the people that are attacking him are from a different political party. Now, there was a lot of concern because when Bobby announced he was running for president, a lot of people who are on the old fashioned classic liberal, no government, stay out of wars, don't spend money, things like this. And then that also worked where, being a conservative, fiscal conservative type person like this. But there's a lot of us that jumped on Bobby's campaign because we've known the man for a long time, but we understand, you know, his heart. We know where he is on this, and it's become a political battle right now. But if you go back, and I've studied every secretary of HHS since 1988, there's not been one secretary of HHS that's publicly talked about vaccine injury in press conference. Bobby's the only first to do that. Why
Mhm.
is that? Everybody else is just issuing paper statements, press releases and stuff like this. So this is something there. But what's also he's advocating, we have to take care of this. What we still haven't figured out yet, and this is the other project that we're working together on, is how to deal with the COVID vaccine injured people. Now, quickly, this countermeasures injury compensation program, which was born in 2010 to address the injuries from the H1N1 vaccine that was developed. It real interesting is anybody wants to do a study project, do a parallel of the development of the H1N1 flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine, and they're very close.
Wow.
They were brought quickly, without science, without testing, boom. The other thing is the H1N1 vaccine now is approved as one of the strains in the quadrivalent flu vaccine that we use today. And we're seeing a ton of injuries out of it. But
Wow.
that's Guillain-Barré, which is the modern day polio, is really where that is, and a few other things. But the COVID vaccine injury compensation or the countermeasures program, statute of limitations is only 1 year from the date of administration. The problem is almost everyone who got the COVID vaccine was never informed of their legal rights. So there was no informed consent. So no one knew about the program. Most of these people are being dismissed because of exceeding the statute of limitations. But it doesn't award for damages for pain and suffering and things like this. It awards a death benefit, but also unreimbursed medical expenses. So most of these, and I put this up on my Substack, most of these on a monthly basis are $4,000, $5,000, $3,000 compensation. That's for what your insurance company didn't cover. That's all it is. There's no other
Yeah.
compensation. So this
It's
is just
crazy.
it's a mess. So what I proposed, and I sent a big proposal to Bobby late last year with a follow up earlier this year, and we're going to slowly work on it, is how do you address COVID vaccine injury? Now, there's 15,000 petitions. My estimation is that's about 1/20th of what actually will be if he
Yeah.
announces compensation. Okay,
Hmm.
so probably 300,000 people. Now, the problem here is that the injuries from the COVID vaccine are not stable, meaning we know what the injuries are for most of the traditional vaccines are, and that's what they come out. The COVID vaccine injuries are really bizarre. 1 year out, they look like, transverse myelitis or Guillain-Barré, and then the medical outcome might shift another 6 months or another year later. Okay, so it's really changing. When you talk to Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Pierre Corey, and others, it's it's really crazy what's happening.
Yeah.
You have blood clots here, and then 6 months later, the person dies and stuff like this. So you have to figure that they're going to take a long time to work this out. So the proposal is basically, how do you address COVID vaccines? Well, up until last fall, I thought the best way to do it was move it into the MVICP. The problem with that is mRNA technology would then be green lighted for every vaccine that we have traditional. Because once you bring the COVID vaccine in with the mRNA technology, the manufacturers say, okay, I can do that for the MMR, I can do that for the flu vaccine, I can do that for all the other vaccines. And we know the mRNA is causing a tremendous problem. So we can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
The other way is, can we bring over the judicial properties of the MVICP, keep it into the CICP, create a separate silo, if you will, and allow people to seek adjudication? That's going to cost a lot of money. It's probably going to cost anywhere from $6 to $10 billion. The problem with that, I can't get Congress to allocate that money. There's no way that Congress is going to do that. It's very difficult. It's going to be, because these cases are going to take 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to litigate out. There's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
ton of them. But you also need to hire more DOJ attorneys, more special masters. You're going to need to, a lot of things. HRSA is going to have to expand their staff. HHS and HRSA have cut a lot of staff. So you can't do this.
So
But
getting
that's the
back
only
to
way to
it,
do this.
what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do about all of this? I
Well,
mean, I know the answer, but
well, but if you allow litigation on an individual case, these people will not prevail.
Mm.
If you allow them to sue and move into a class,
Yeah.
200, 500, 1,000 people in a class, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be lengthy. It's going to be expensive. So trying to find a law firm that will do this on their own nickel for 10 years is going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I go back to Gardasil. Gardasil is now in a class, what they call a multi-district litigation over in North Carolina in front of a judge. The judge dismissed most of those cases.
Wow.
And they're suing for fraud. They're not suing for injury.
Hmm.
I saw the documents. I was on the initial discovery team looking at these documents from Merck, and the way they deceived the federal government, the FDA, and they hid known injury profiles. You don't give this Gardasil to girls that are taking certain types of antidepressants or certain types of acne medications.
Hmm.
Things like this, their risk, triples or quadruples,
Yeah.
things like this. So it's difficult there, but it can be done. But our government's going to have a come to Jesus moment here, and that is that if you're going to declare an emergency, you're going to have to compensate those who thought they were, the Bree Dressens of the world and everybody else who has been injured. There's a lot of people who are walking around that don't even know they've been injured yet, but
Yep.
they are.
Yeah.
So how do
And
you address that? That's the problem that we're having here with how do
mhm.
you address the COVID vaccine injury, and then but also keep the MVICP going, um, and don't allow this mRNA type technology to run loose in our society, which I'm afraid could happen.
Yeah, it'll be like near impossible, but what would solve all of this is just repealing the Vaccine Injury Act. And then we would be allowed, people can sue the manufacturers like anything else.
Mhm.
And our judicial branch would take care of things. And it wouldn't be the taxpayers funding both sides of the argument, getting limited amount and all this stuff. At least people, not that our judicial system is perfect, but it is definitely better than what the options are right now. And Thomas Massey even talked about this recently. And I guess he was talking specifically about the COVID vaccine, that we need to get rid of the immunity from those COVID vaccine manufacturers. And I said, Congressman, do you have a bill that we can promote? And he's like, I co-sponsored this one, and it was only for COVID. So it's a starting place. I can put, if I remember, I'll put it in the description for this episode what bill it is. So that is something that we can advocate for COVID, but it really needs to be all vaccines. Like, again, it's it's against the Constitution in my mind. Can't say that enough. The other option, since it's very unlikely that anything will happen with Congress because they're a mess, the other option is that lawyers can sue on whether or not the Vaccine Injury Act, and whatever act gave COVID immunity to, is unconstitutional, which, again, I think that would be a lengthy process because I think it goes back to that 1977 OSHA case. That would need to be overturned, and then it would be a domino effect. Um, Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I just know how to read, and those are the conclusions I've drawn.
Let me push back a little bit. You're on the right track, though. The PrEP Act for COVID is extended through at the end of December of 2029. Biden's Secretary of HHS, right before the election, extended it out. Okay. Now, Kennedy supposedly can terminate that. I think that will cost him his job because there's people in the White House that enjoy the PrEP Act. The pharma has people in the White House, and I think it could possibly cost him his job. But he could go in and do some things within the PrEP Act, such as reduce what we call covered persons designations. Right now, everybody and their dog can almost administer a COVID vaccine and be covered as what we call covered persons and not have immunity for malpractice, things like this. He could reduce it to just doctors
Mhm.
and PAs and stuff like that. But you have National Guard, you have pharmacy techs, you have you have tons of different people. That could be one thing. So therefore, it would reduce who can administer a vaccine. But when you have 20% of the population is only current on the COVID, people are wising up. They're figuring this thing out. Okay. So you have the PrEP Act. There's several lawsuits out there. Jeff Childers in Florida's got one. Aaron Siri's got one. Ray Flores had one, and about that boy in Michigan, and things like this. The problem with those, and I've talked to all these attorneys, I talk to them freely, is they all say there's not a judge out there that wants to be known as the judge that will reverse PrEP Act.
Uh,
That's how you're playing it. But the judicial system is also captured by pharma.
mhm.
Okay. And people have to also understand the federal appeal system, the appellate court system, is heavily in favor of defendants, which would be pharma in this case. Appellate courts are very friendly towards defendants. It's the way the system works. So you have the court, you have the COVID vaccines, and then you have the PrEP Act. Now, going back to the MVICP, you want to appeal it. I would say no. My opinion says don't remove it. Just restore Congress. Restore Section 23 to allow people to exit and sue. Because believe it or not, the vaccine court is actually functioning very well for adults right
Hmm.
now. Adults make up 94, 95, 96 over the last decade now, the last 10 years, of all compensated cases, 94 to 96% each year are for adults. This program was designed for children. Children are being thrown under the bus. Yes, the program is hideous and horrible for children, but for adults who are injured from the flu shot causing Guillain-Barré or shoulder injury, it's very economical for them to go to the program. They're going to get awarded damages, and it's going to be better than if they tried to do that in a state or federal court system. That would take years, and then the attorney fees are coming out of their own pocket and stuff like this. It's actually works well for that, but that's that one area. Okay. I would say, please restore Section 23 of the Act, or as Congressman Gosar's bill, which I believe is what Massey signed on to, give people an option. They're not
Yeah.
required. Okay. Don't repeal the act. One, there's not enough capital to do that. This Congress can do it, but they might have a chance to restore or allow people a choice prior.
Mm-hmm.
You go into
Makes
the
sense.
program, you stay in the program, or you can take your chances in state or federal court.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think the best way to do that. But we also then have to address those who are injured, as Congress and the arguments on the congressional floor in Senate and also in the House back in 1984 and 1985, prior to the passage of the act, said we need to have a fast, efficient, fair, and generous program for those who have been injured. That's not what we have now. It's very litigious, very adversarial. But if we can get to that point, let people choose. Let parents choose what's best for their family. Let an adult choose what's best for them. But in case there is unforeseen an injury, then we must be able to address. Otherwise, the next time we have a pandemic or an outbreak, you're not going to have hardly anybody comply. I mean, I've been on the record since 2018 talking about the dangers of this PrEP Act. Prior to COVID, I said the PrEP Act and the countermeasures program, which was there, is not designed for any nationwide long-term outbreaks. It was always designed when it was passed in the countermeasures program in 2010, and when the PrEP Act was passed in 25, there was where Senator Ted Kennedy went right up to Senator Bill Frist of Tennessee. And Frist was trying to move the PrEP Act and says, you're going to rue the day. He put his finger right into Frist's chest on the Senate floor and said, you're going to rue the day when this thing passes. And sure enough, look what's happened to the PrEP Act and what the damage has been done here. I mean, we shouldn't be doing this. This is insane. But money talks, and there's where we are.
Yeah. Well, also I would add if we're just talking like amending it to also increase the statute of limitations, because that's just insane. But Wayne, I really appreciate you talking with me today. I've learned so much from you. But I want to ask you, like, if people take one thing away, like, what is that one thing that you want people to know, that one thing you want people to leave with today?
Vaccines have risks. I'm not an expert on the science, but I know that they have risks. It's your choice. And make sure you understand, don't be coerced into a reaction, or to receiving a vaccine if you don't feel comfortable with that. But then also research what you want to know about the vaccine, but know your legal rights. And it's unfortunately, we didn't know at the time for my son. My son's a loving kid. We have fun together, but his dreams and our dreams for him to have a family and a good career are not there. Now we're worried about who's going to take care of him when we pass. So research, and you make your decisions. What's best for you and your family.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you joining me today and also talking about your son. I will not stop screaming from the rooftops that autism is a spectrum and we need to recognize the whole thing, not just talk about the high functioning and completely dismiss that severe autism is
Mhm.
a thing. And these kids that are now adults too, they need help. And if we can prevent it, we need to. No one should have to live a life like that if there is a choice. And we need research to see if we can prevent it. And that's not a dirty word. Research is a good thing. And even if it comes back that it's genetic, then that's fine. But right now, there's not enough research. People love to say what autism is not caused by, but no one wants to, not enough people are talking about what it is caused by. So let's do the research. And again, Wayne, I really appreciate you joining me today. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. I'm out on Twitter, the sewer of social media. If people want to do it at Wayne Rohde. Um, I'm also have a Substack, which is the vaccine court slash or dot substack.com, and right on point out on the Rumble channel is my podcast. I'm not doing as many podcasts lately, just as that I'm more busy with writing and then the other projects that I'm doing right now. So I try not to stretch myself out too much, but it's there. The other thing is that I want people to be vigilant about what's happening with your government in regards to these battles, and realize that a lot of these discussions are through political lenses, and we shouldn't be that way. We should be through, human beings and Americans looking at this together. But
Exactly.
unfortunately, a lot of the loud people out there look at it through a political lens, and that's not right. But you can contact me through my the website, which is thevaccinecourt.com. I got the two books, The Vaccine Court and Vaccine Court 2.0, out there. And we'll go from there. Thank you.
And I'll just leave it at this. My favorite quote from RFK Jr. is that the only way to save our country and our children is if we love our kids more than we hate each other. So I'll leave that with everyone today. And again, thank you, Wayne, so much for joining us.
Welcome.